16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed.
Today is Easter, which for Christians is the high holy day of the year. Some people say, well, isn't that Christmas? No. We are a resurrection people. And so for us, Easter is that high holy day. In fact, a lot of folks in the church, myself included, like to call this Resurrection Day because that's what it's about. And I like this because resurrection is the beginning of something new. One of the things that I've kept on the table throughout Lenten season, and it remains on the table here today in Easter, is that butterfly, because it reminds us that something new can emerge from the old. Now that sounds like good news during a year when sheltering in place kind of became the new same old, right? This is great that we are here together. We went from red tier, something great happened last week. If you want to talk about good things, we went this last week, I believe, Wednesday at midnight, from red tier, which means substantial, to orange tier, which means moderate. And that means that here in the sanctuary, last week when we met here for the first time for Palm Sunday, we were able to have 25% capacity in this sanctuary. And it was the first time that we met in the sanctuary for 53 weeks. So here we are in orange tier where we can have 50% of the capacity of this sanctuary. It's awesome to be here just in time for Easter. I do want to remind you though, this isn't the first time that we've gone into orange tier, right? It's happened before in the summer. It happened in a little bit in October. And I know Chico, and I know Halloween. And I said, I bet you in about 2 weeks we're going to get knocked up to purple tier again. Now, I have my massage therapist friend. Sometimes I'll say, I'm a prophet. And she'll say, no, you're not. You're good at pattern recognition.
Amen.
And she was right. I was right because we went back up in the purple tier both times. And I hope that that doesn't happen again. So I'm very happy to see that folks are still taking precautions, even though many of us have been vaccinated. I mentioned last week, Pastor Ted Furch from First Christian Church in Sacramento warned us that there's an upside and a downside to coming back into the sanctuary to meet live. The upside is we are here, right? The downside is that there's a lot of things that don't look the same. There's a lot of things that we aren't able to do yet. There's going to be an awkwardness for a while. Katie Valentine, early on in the pandemic, told us, acknowledge how weird it is and go from there. This is a fail-free zone. I know the folks here in Zoom land and Facebook land might be saying, I can't hear very well. And my answer to everything today on Facebook Live and Zoom is, I know and we're working on it, okay? So anything that you might type in or ask me later, the answer is I know, we're working on it. We got some kinks to work out on how we make sure that people in the sanctuary and on our online community have a consistently good worship experience. Hang in there. We are entering into something new, and hope will rise again. We spent some time in John's Gospel this morning at sunrise service, and that the beauty of having 4 accounts of the Gospel is that you've always got more than one to choose from. And we follow a thing here in this church called the lectionary, and what it does is it gives you a choice of readings. And it's on a 3-year cycle, so it gives you an Old Testament, a Psalm, a New Testament, and an epistle, meaning gospel and an epistle. And as far as the lectionary is concerned, this year is a Gospel of Mark Easter. And those of you who know me know that I love the Gospel of Mark. And the reason I like Mark so much is that he's a no-nonsense, get down to, his favorite word is immediately. Jesus will do something, and then immediately he's going somewhere else to do something. It is the most straightforward gospel that we have, but consequently it gives us the most abrupt ending. Now, I need to put on my Bible scholar hat for a little bit, and I need you to do this too, all right? Because here's something that a lot of folks don't know. In the very earliest manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark, we're talking the scraps and shreds of papyrus that has the original Greek written on it. In the very earliest scraps of the ending of Mark, the book ends in verse 8, which is the last verse that Mary read. If you're following along in your own Bible, you might notice that it goes on for another 11 verses. Yes, it does. But you also might have a Bible that labels those verses the longer ending of Mark. So, see, it wasn't until the 2nd and 3rd century that we started seeing verses 9 through 20 show up in these manuscripts. And honestly, I can see why people may have wanted to add those extra verses, because if you end it where we ended in verse 8, it sounds like something's missing. But I want you all to get in your time machines today. Not only do you have your Bible scholar hats on, but you're going to get into your time machines today. And we're going to go back to the 1st century and the 2nd century and pretend that you are a part of the community where Mark's gospel was written for. Okay, are you there yet? The little clock's spinning around, the lights are flashing, and now here you are. 2nd century church where Mark's gospel was written for. If you are a person in Mark's faith community, that means you understand Greek. Do y'all understand Greek? Remember, we went back in our time machine. Thumbs up. You all know Greek. You all know Greek now. Now, it's possible that your native language isn't Greek. It might be Aramaic. It might be Hebrew. But you do understand Greek, because that's the trade language of the region. It is the language of the marketplace. Now, this is how everybody is able to speak to one another. This is how people are able to do business with each other. It is, I want you to think now that if you think Mark sounds like it ends abruptly in English, wait till you hear how it sounds if you're just transliterating the Greek, if you're just reading straight from the Greek. This is going to sound backwards. If you're a Star Wars fan, this is going to sound like Yoda speak. But a lot of non-English languages do kind of sound like Yoda speak, just the way they're constructed. But here's our text, literally, word for word in the Greek. And having gone out, they fled from the tomb, had ceased for them trembling and amazement, and to nothing they spoke. They were afraid, for now, I'm sure you've had English teachers and grammar nerds tell you that you never end a sentence in a preposition. Heck, I just did that a couple of seconds ago, didn't Of course, we do it. Of course, we do it in the English language, especially in some geographic regions. Now, you know I spent 9 years in Virginia. In Virginia, I heard a lot of sentences and in prepositions. You know what the most common one is? Where are y'all from? Now, if you want to be called an uppity Yankee for the rest of your life, you'd say from a place that doesn't end sentences and prepositions. But here we are in Mark's Gospel, where the sentence ends with a conjunction, which is a big no-no in any language, right? It makes it sound like you're ending in the middle of a sentence. For. Okay, for what? What's the rest of the story? There's got to be something more, right? Yeah, there is. And that is the beauty of Mark's Gospel. There is more. But in Mark's case, only the reader or the listener can bring that closure. You sound crazy? Well, okay. Work with me on this one. Lamar Williamson, he's a commentator on the Gospel of Mark, and he writes, when is an ending not the end? When a dead man rises from the tomb, and when a gospel ends in the middle of a sentence. And Reverend Dr. Emerson B. Powery, who's the professor of biblical studies at Messiah College, he addresses Mark's abrupt ending in the context of an African-American man. He says, as descendants of the enslaved, we too understand how some stories do not end with simplistic conclusions as if things were all happily ever after. We lose the need for Easter when things are wrapped up in a nice little package. If the responsibility is on the receiver to end the gospel, then we've got some work to do to transform the world, right? We've got some transformative work to do. If the responsibility is on the receiver to end the gospel, we've got to own up to things that are unfinished, that are not transformed. And that means we got to do the difficult work of addressing things like racism. We've got to ask hard questions like, how am I contributing to racial justice? Or maybe the better term would be, how am I contributing to racial injustice? Or how is my silence in the matter perpetuating the whole system anyway? If the responsibility of putting a period on the end of the gospel is on the receiver, then we also need to address how we have failed in caring for our fellow human beings, especially those who deal with mental illness or addiction or any of the other social maladies that we think are yucky because we were fortunate enough to have the resources to keep us from getting completely submerged or buried in them. If the responsibility of putting a conclusion on the gospel is up to us, then we've got to come face to face with why we are so daggone violent. We got to address why we're so polarized. We got to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask, why can I not see God in my fellow human beings, even the ones with whom I disagree? See, I could have added a preposition there, but I didn't. My words affirm that we are all made in the image of God, and yet I can't even look my fellow human being in the eye without thinking that they're what's wrong with the world. We got to deal with stuff like that. See, Easter is uncomfortable. We love to come here and shout our hallelujahs, and it is worth celebrating. Are we right to be filled with joy and respond to God's gift to us through Christ with hearty amens and He is risen?
He is risen indeed.
See? Yes. The answer is yes. As we have been taught, and as we have affirmed, Jesus' betrayal and arrest was not the end of the story. As we have been taught, and as we have affirmed, Jesus' trial and crucifixion was not the end of the story. as we have been taught and as we have now affirmed, his death and the tomb was not the end of the story. But because we are putting on our Mark hats this morning, we have to consider that even the empty tomb, even the resurrection, is not the complete end of the story. The resurrection is an invitation to transformation. And transformation is rarely easy. And it is rarely comfortable. And it is always ongoing. Wow, you sure laid that one on thick there, Jesse. Can't we just rejoice in the fact that we're here in the sanctuary and in person and after this awful COVID year? Can't we just breathe and feel good about this for a sec? I mean, you already said that Easter is the high holy day of the Christian faith. Can't you just revel in the good news of the story? Of course. Of course we can, and of course we should. Remember, the good news is not just about the story of the book, but the story which moves us as Christ's followers to action. You are the end of the gospel. You want to experience the resurrected Christ? Here's how you do it. Live as he lived. Love as he loved. Forgive as he forgave. And believe as he believed, and you will experience the resurrected Christ. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed.